We can finish on time. Hi everyone, happy Monday and happy St. Patrick's Day. I hope everyone had a good weekend. My name is Molly Carmichael. I'm the Communications and Digital Director at the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. So thanks so much for joining us. This is part one of the Big Money Briefing. So this is a three-part series. We'll talk a bit more about parts 2 and 3 at the end of this. And anyone who wants to register ahead of time, we can take care of that. But with early voting starting tomorrow and being, just about 2 weeks out from Election Day, we thought this would be a really good time to touch base with you all, get everyone the most up-to-date data, talk a little bit about what we do at Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, and then also kind of talk about a bit about our analysis of this election, billionaire influence, and then just open it up to questions because we want to hear, what you guys are looking for and how we can help. And anything that we can't answer right in this briefing, we'll be sure to get you that information as soon as we can. And just a little bit about Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. So it's actually our 30th birthday this year. Woo. So we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization started in 1995. We have a database where we track money in our elections. We also work for different reforms to the issue of money in politics here in our state. And then also, as is suggested in the name, democracy, we do lots of initiatives to strengthen democracy here in Wisconsin. So we house the Fair Maps Coalition, which is working right now to pass legislation so that way we can permanently end gerrymandering in our state and don't have to go through this debacle again in 2030. We also do things with voting rights. So when it comes to things like accessibility, fighting for drop boxes, and working against what we believe are some harmful constitutional amendments like this one we have coming up in April. Yeah, and I will pass it over to Sam now to walk you all through the data that we have collected this spring. Sam is our research director.
Hi all, thanks Molly. My name is Samantha DeForest Davis, and as Molly said, I am the research director at Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. Molly mentioned a little bit what we're going to review today, so I'm going to share a little bit just about the specifics of the data and the money that we're seeing in the Supreme Court race, as well as in the superintendent race. I'm also going to discuss briefly about issue ads, and then I will kick it to our wonderful executive director to give a little bit of context and talk about billionaire influence in the state of Wisconsin in this election. Next slide. So just a brief overview, we wanted to break down what each candidate has fundraised so far, as well as some contributions they've been receiving. These numbers are current as of today. However, we know that on March 25th, there is a deadline for candidate fundraising and spending. And so we are assuming that these numbers will likely increase once we get those files in the next week or two. That is the pre-candidate election reports that are due towards the end of March. So for Crawford, we're seeing that she has raised about 7.36 million compared to Schimmel's 4.93. We also wanted to highlight the number of contributors have given the max amount. So according to our state law, individuals can give a maximum of $20,000 to each candidate. That does not mean that they can also not give to PACs or can give to parties, so they may have done that. But we're seeing that for Crawford, we have 35 people that have given the maximum amount of $20,000. And for Schimmel, we have more individual contributors who have given the maximum $20,000 at 47. Again, these individuals may have also given to parties or given to PACs. Moving in from that, we see that the PAC contributions, Crawford has received about 3.25 million, while Schimel has received 1.38 million. We also included the state party PACs in that PAC contribution. So Crawford has gotten about 3 million from the Wisconsin Democratic PAC Party, while Schimel has gotten just around 1.675 million from the Republican Party PAC. Next slide. We also wanted to highlight independent expenditures. So these are numbers that are spent either maybe for or against a candidate by an independent expenditure committee. So total all in, we are seeing about 29.4 million disclosed independent expenditures just on the Supreme Court race alone as of this morning. This number is a little bit conservative. At the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, we like to look at actual money spent by groups or money spent that groups have claimed and not just on reservations. So our number is a little bit more conservative than others, but this number is increasing every single day. Breaking it down from Pro Schimmel and Anne Crawford, we're seeing that's where a majority of independent expenditures are being spent at right around 21.44 million, as opposed to Pro Schimmel and Anti-Crawford independent expenditure spending, we're seeing just about at the 7.79 million. Next slide. Just to give a little bit of context for this race versus 2 years ago in the last Wisconsin Supreme Court race, as I mentioned, right now we are sitting at about $29.24 million on independent expenditure spending. And just 2 years ago in the Supreme Court race, about 15 days or 2 weeks out from the election, which we are now, that independent expenditure spending was at 14.41 million. So that's an increase of right around 103. It's exactly 102.97. Just from 2 years ago, what we're seeing in spending for this current race. And again, these numbers just continue to increase daily. Switching a little bit to issue ads, as I mentioned at the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign, we track and collect this data ongoing. So we are in the process of creating those numbers and getting them from what groups have claimed to spend and also what they have actually spent. But we have been getting and tracking what groups have been spending the most. And we're seeing 4 in particular, 2 that are very anti-Schimmel and then 2 that are very anti-Crawford. So the 2 that have been very out and spending for issue ads for anti-Schimmel have been A Better Wisconsin Together, as well as the Justice Project Action. Some of the themes that we're seeing, including like being too soft on sexual predators, we're also seeing themes comparing his connection to Musk and to Trump, which we'll talk about in a little bit later in the presentation. Next slide. As I mentioned, for Crawford, we're seeing some phony issue ads from 2 groups in particular, Progress 2028, as well as the WMC Issues Mobilization Council. These groups are really hitting heavy and claiming that, again, we're seeing similar themes that Crawford is too easy on criminals, including and especially sexual predators. And we're also seeing themes of being too extreme, too radical for the Wisconsin courts. Next slide. Switching gears a little bit to the superintendent race, definitely less money flowing into this race in the Supreme Court, but we're still seeing thousands and thousands of dollars that these candidates are fundraising and also receiving from PACs. One thing I wanted to highlight in particular is that we see Underling has raised the $1,039-ish $1,000 compared to Kinzer, who has raised almost double that amount. However, the reversal has happened where we see Underly has received a far majority of PAC contributions, including a large amount from the Wisconsin Dem State Party PAC, almost at $56,000 compared to Kinzer, who has received far less, only at $2,500 from her state party PAC. I also wanted to highlight the number of contributors that have maxed out. As I mentioned, the maximum that an individual can give to a candidate is $20,000. And while we're seeing that individuals are giving that amount in the Supreme Court race, we're seeing that none have reached that maximum amount in the superintendent race. Individuals are still giving, but none have reached that 20,000. That number might change, and we'll talk about future briefings where we're going to update our numbers once we get the final numbers in a couple of weeks. Next slide. Also wanted to highlight the independent expenditures for the superintendent race. They're sitting right now at just over $63,000, with a majority of that going to pro-Kinzer, anti-Underly independent expenditure spending. Next slide. And I'm going to pass it to our Executive Director, Nick Ramos.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nick Ramos. I am the proud executive director of the Wisconsin Democracy Campaign. And, these next couple of slides, I want to take a little bit of time to just put this into context. We spent time looking at numbers, but you have to realize the fact that it feels like every Supreme Court race in recent memory has been eliciting so much attention. One, because Wisconsin being one of those, battleground states where the numbers really are close in statewide elections and in national races here. And coming off of the heels of a presidential election, this race most definitely has garnered national, if not world attention, because people are looking to try and understand what where we are as a state, where we are as a country post presidential election, and the billionaires that are investing in this race, they are making a similar calculus, it seems. I mean, right now we are seeing unprecedented spending, and I mean that sincerely. That, as Sam already alluded to it, that we are already on track. I mean, we're closing in on that $51 million number, and it's already March 17th. Like, we still have 2 more weeks here, and it would not be crazy to say that this race could be double what the last Supreme Court race was, especially with the trends and especially with the track that we're on. And I think we have to give all the credit to Citizens United for being the floodgates that we see across the nation when it comes to campaign finance and spending. But also, we look to 2015 and the rewrite of our campaign finance laws and just how much it has become this wild west of campaign spending here in Wisconsin. And so the list in front of you, you'll see, I mean, the talk of the town has most definitely been Elon Musk, and rightfully so, because between America PAC and Building America's Future and just the arms and tentacles, Progress 2028 was described. Like, we're watching just money flood from out of state into Wisconsin, and it's not just exclusive to Elon Musk. Like, there are a list of other contributors, both Republican leaning contributors, Democrat leaning contributors, but the millionaires and the billionaires are right now hedging their bets and trying to see how we come out of April 1st. And I think it may be a bigger testament to some of the field and program and money that folks are going to think they can spend to try and win races. And so we could go to the next slide. And just to really like echo more, I mean, I talked about the two tentacles from Elon Musk as far as just some of the organizations and PACs that are led by Elon. And the top two pro Schimmel groups are America PAC, which Musk is overseeing, and then Building America's Future, again, Musk tied. And so we're looking at $6.5 million so far to date as of today from America PAC. And I know that some of that money has gone into direct mail and some of that has been a subject of controversy. But then you have Building America's Future, 4.5 million. And if my memory serves me correctly, I believe that a lot of that money is a combination of some of the field work that is happening on the ground here in Wisconsin and for this Supreme Court race. Um, at, at least three of pro Schimmel groups have financial ties to Richard Uihlein. We've got Fair Courts America, America's PAC IEO, and American Principles Project PAC. And so we're seeing this flood. And guess what? With 2 weeks left, there is going to be even more money dropping. And that's why we thought it was important to try and get in front of all of you in this mid-month point, because once we get to the end and when the dust settles, I'm sure that we are going to be looking at record-shattering money yet again. And until we do some real things to rein in the the immense amount of money that is coming in and have better transparency and have a better system to just put our arms around this, we are going to continue breaking records in this state. I promise you that. And well, guess what? We have another Supreme Court race next year, and we got several of them leading up into 2030. So until something real happens, and here at the Democracy Campaign, we will be working in coalition with folks to really push this to try and get some fix. But until we get to that point, I guess this is what we are going to come to expect now and into the future until something changes. Next slide. And so I know that this press conference has been a lot about just understanding the numbers, understanding the data, seeing the trends, and getting a sense of just where we are with a couple weeks left. And I just want people at home to know that, like, all of this money, us reporting it, it's not meant to scare people from participating in our democracy. It's not meant to make people think, well, I'm sitting here, I only have, just a little bit of money or a little bit of time to spare, and I'm seeing these whales come in here and absolutely flood our races to try and influence a race. Where do I fit in this calculus? And my most important message to folks is the fact that while the mega wealthy are pouring millions into this Supreme Court race, guess what, guys? That at the end of the day, money does not vote, people do. And your power and your voice is that vote. And so this should not stymie you from participating in this beautiful thing we call democracy. If anything, it should make you want to have your voice heard and heard loudly, because it's easy to just let commercials and digital ads and mailers make you think that you do not make an impact. But I promise you, it is the opposite. It is why they are spending so much money. It's because they think that it can do the things it needs to do to get people up and either voting or stay away. And so I want you to know that, like, we have an election April 1st. First day of in-person early voting is tomorrow, Tuesday, March 18th. Please go to My Vote Wisconsin, check your registration, check where you're voting at, and make a plan to vote right now. And like, we had snow here in the Milwaukee area. It's a great reminder that you want to try and go vote when you have time to, and not wait till the last minute, because things happen, weather happen, life happens. And so again, mega wealthy, money don't vote, people do. And we can go to the next slide. And with that, I'm opening it up to the media. If you have any questions, now is the time. And I see we got one in the chat. It says, all right, so first one, Allison Durr. Nick, am I understanding correctly? You think more than 100 million could be spent on this race when it's all said and done? If so, what is included in that tally? PAC spending, candidate committees, other sources. So before like we saw this cash infusion from Elon Musk and just this massive dumping, I mean, it was safe to say that, like, we were looking at potentially a race that would hit in that $70 million marker, knowing that, like, again, we had the privilege of, in 2023, a primary, which those numbers included primary spending from candidates that didn't make it to the general. And in this particular election, we're sitting here looking at just two candidates. One, it's a nonpartisan race, but like, for all intents and purposes, we see that there's one candidate that Dems and progressives are leaning towards, at least just in ideology. But then on the other side, conservative and Republican on the other side. And with that, just two candidates alone, we're already getting close to eclipsing the record without counting reserve ad money. So, like, with 2 weeks left, there's going to be late dumps. And I think it would be safe to say, when you add up all of the numbers together, PAC spending, the committees, the independent expenditures, all of it together, I would not shock me or surprise me if when the dust settles, we hit $100 million. But again, this is just projecting. And so if we come under that number, okay, we go over it, I wouldn't be surprised, but I just think there's going to be lots of money in the next couple weeks that get spent.
I can
And then
read the next question, Nick, if
go
you.
ahead.
Some Wisconsin residents have received postcards that erroneously list the election date as April 11. I saw some of these in Reddit. Is this something you're concerned about? What should be done in response?
Absolutely. Two things. One, we are concerned about that, and it's something that I raised last week when I saw it going viral on Reddit with fellow voting rights organizations to see if it was just an anomaly or if there is more intentionality about trying to give mis and disinformation to folks in order to um, force people or like make people think that the election's April 11th instead of April 1st. I mean, human error happens on postcards. So on one hand, it's like, you want to give people the benefit of the doubt, but we are tracking it to see if this is as widespread as it may be. And if so, then we want to make sure that there is a vehicle in place for whether it's a complaint or if there is something more robust in the form of legal options. We want to be able to try and stomp out folks that are clearly trying to deliberately confuse folks from missing election day. And so that is something that we are monitoring, and we very soon we'll make that decision as far as like whether or not a complaint is warranted or if it's a simple, just error that isn't as widespread. But, that is something that's come to my attention. And the other thing that's come to my attention is some of the direct mail that has been hitting um, people's mailboxes that it looks like it came from America Pac, and it looks like the messaging is if Judge Schimmel takes the court, he will support President Trump's agenda, and there may be some issues that I think the Wisconsin um, Elections Commission would be interested in exploring on, and so it seems like there's new complaints and new things happening every week. And so we're trying to monitor and make sure what are the credible, valid ones that are worth pursuing, and then what are some that might not necessarily rise to the level of a complaint. And so that's where we're at right now.
Next question, is WDC doing anything in particular to get people out to vote early?
Yeah, absolutely. So tomorrow, Tuesday, March 18th, at the start of in-person early voting, um, during a few different election cycles, we have launched this program. And I'm happy to announce that tomorrow, in Madison at the Black Business Hub, which is 2352 South Park Street, Madison, Wisconsin, from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m., we are hosting a GOTV Day of Action at the Black Business Hub, where volunteers and organizations that are in the voting rights state and in the voting rights space here in Wisconsin are going to be leading various tactics to help folks get out to vote. We're going to be doing a march to early vote. We're going to be doing letter writing and postcard writing. We have a petition that's circulating around the constitutional amendment that's on the ballot that's that's centered around voter ID. There's going to be lunch and community and ways for people to continue to reach people across the state through a variety of different tactics. And so I highly encourage anyone listening at home to please join us 10 a.m. We'll have a press conference in the beginning, and we'll be sending out a media advisory about that. And then the day is just going to be filled with love and action for folks to just continue to be civically engaged.
Next question. What do you point to as recommendations or thoughts on what the first step should be to address campaign finance reform here in Wisconsin? Any discussions with lawmakers on legislation around this issue?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say that right now, I mean, it's hard to be able to get people to really take a second to think thoughtfully about campaign finance reform, knowing that we're in the thick of an election. However, um, over the last few months, I mean, and even back in 2024, there were conversations that were had that it felt like regardless of political party, folks have an appetite to have some discussions about what exactly we can do to try and reform the system a bit so that it doesn't have to be this all out glorified telemarketer just format where campaigns and candidates feel like they basically have to do their best dance in front of the biggest donors in order to win elections versus doing the types of grassroots small dollar stuff that would be impactful and engaging people in the process. And so I think that there's going to be some real opportunities now that we know where this money is going and how it's being spent, and can actually showcase the fact that this is, I think it should be a problem and something on people's radars that we here in Wisconsin continue to break national records when it comes to our Supreme Court elections and the fundraising that goes into them. And we have an opportunity here at the state level to do some reform to really curb that so that it's less incentive, like there's less of an incentive to have to try and go towards donors that are just going to flood war coffers, and better yet, like actually speak with and communicate with um, more people at maybe a smaller donor clip. And so my thing is that there's going to be some real robust conversations to talk about transparency, to talk about how we can get our arms around it. And I think that those conversations will come immediately after this election.
So this next question, Nick, maybe you can start, but Beverly, also if you have anything to add, since you are, very familiar with the organization's history and why things are done the way they're done. So this question from Sarah, you mentioned that WDC's estimate of independent expenditures in the Supreme Court race so far is a conservative one. Could you talk more about why that is?
I mean, I'll just start briefly and then I'll kick it around. I saw Sam come off mute, and then if there's any additional info, then like I'll make sure team's able to pick that up. But I just know that from what I've seen, there's been some numbers that might look bigger and gaudier than the ones that we are sharing with you all today. And what Sam was getting to earlier is the fact that when we're looking at some of the bigger numbers, what's put into that, I believe, and Sam, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's additional money that is being attributed to the count as far as just reserve ad money. And reason why we don't report that is because we want to see actual spending. We want to see, the actual numbers versus numbers that are being kind of earmarked for potential ads but may never run. And so we just literally report on the money as we know it from what we see is actually being spent versus what the potential of the money that could be spent but is being earmarked for ad money. And I don't know if I hit it, but Sam, please correct me if I said anything incorrectly.
Yeah, that's exactly correct. So our totals are only disclosed independent expenditure spending. So as Nick said, a lot of times there are ad reservations, but they might not, for whatever reason, actually happen, or that money isn't actually spent. So we only track the money that is spent by groups, and that's like an ongoing process. So that's why we have a more conservative number.
You both. And this next question is for Sam, and I believe this is in reference to the Justice Action Project as part of the issue ads portion. So Sam described one group as anti-shimmel, although the description of the group's communication was that it was more neutral. Can you share the reasoning behind the conclusion that it was indeed more anti-shimmel?
Absolutely. So yes, this group compared to some others is quote unquote more neutral. They do have a nonpartisan voter guides about the candidates that do compare them to each other. However, when we look at the organization as a whole, they have backed 527 groups for other Democratic candidates, including last year in 2024 for the Michigan State Supreme Court election. We also see, even in their nonpartisan, quote unquote, materials, whether it's advertisements or their websites, they are painting a picture of being more pro Crawford than pro Schimmel. So that's why we have it under the anti-Schimmel category. And if you need clarification for that, please just let me know. I can follow up.
Another question, will GOTV expenditures by parties and outside groups be counted in your final tally? Sam, do you want to take this one too?
Yeah, so we don't count and include in our totals just the general get out the vote money that people spend. We are only looking at issue ads, independent expenditures that are either pro or anti a candidate. So if an organization is just doing purely nonpartisan get out the vote work, that doesn't go into our totals, which is also perhaps why you're seeing other inflated numbers from other organizations that do track and count that.
Next question, you mentioned hopes that the large spending numbers in this Supreme Court race will bring enthusiasm for campaign finance reform. What reforms specifically would be beneficial in Wisconsin? Should state campaign finance law be amended? And if so, what changes would you like to see pursued first?
Wow, $1 million question, $1 billion question. Well, I would say that yes, I do believe, especially in the current state of things, and I look forward to our next briefing when we get to really talk about the poll and whatnot. I honestly believe that folks have their eyes open around the money in a way that they have not previously. And I think that with the final numbers, when we get to that point and we get past April 1st, I think one of the things that we find interesting, especially for Supreme Court races, is the fact that for 2 years in this state, from 2009 to 2011, we had some level of a public campaign finance system that was um, centered around the Supreme Court itself. However, it was very short lived, and I don't think it was truly implemented when it existed. But I think that, like, when I talk about more civic engagement when it comes to our elections, one of those things most definitely is trying to rebuild and create something that could be a better system than what we had previously. And I believe that we could, with some help from lawmakers and with the showing of grassroots people around the state showing that they're saying enough is enough, that we could be able to institute a public campaign finance system as just a testing ground for the Supreme Court to see if then it could be applied to other races that are here in Wisconsin. And I think I look to models like in Seattle where they have a voucher system where, in order for candidates to be able to take public taxpayer money for their campaigns, they would have to reach a certain threshold of engaging with X amount of small dollar donors and be able to show vouchers that match that. And once you hit that threshold and show that, like, you're able to not only speak with X amount of people at a certain number, and like they were able to contribute, small dollar contributions, that you could then be able to use more of the state finance money, and then there would be less of an incentive for folks to have to go chase some of this bigger money that is out there to try and go win races. And so I think one of the big things is going to have to be looking at an overhaul of how we um, actually incentivize and like give folks the opportunities to run and fund their campaigns. But another part of that is that let's face facts, like, as far as transparency, as far as like actually people having to identify this money, there's a reason why we talk about dark money so much. I mean, people are playing a shell game. People and corporations are playing shell games with our campaign finance system, and they know that once they max out, they need to do is go to the committee or the party of their choice and write them a blank check. And guess what? It's not sitting with that party or committee. It's going directly to the campaigns. And like, we need to get a better handle on disclosures and transparency and be able to put some guardrails in instead of having this basically legal money laundering scheme that gets to take place because this is what our laws are, that allow these folks to be able to just flood as much money as they want as long as they do it in the right echo chamber. And like, we have some real opportunities to be able to do some rewriting and changing. And I think lawmakers will be more receptive going forward, knowing that this way, next time we talk around an election, it could be 125 million, 150 million that we project. And like, we need to stop this and be getting into a better place where there's more agency for the voters and less money that is just literally being lit on fire. Yeah, yeah.
I think we'll do one more question, then we'll close it out since we're over time. So thank you all so much for all of these great questions. Are you at all concerned about the numbers from the Marquette Law poll that said voters don't have an opinion on candidates, and what is WDC doing to change that?
Great question. And I would say I'm not concerned in that when it comes to spring elections, that a lot of times these are very low voter turnout elections typically. And that like people I think are somewhat I think a lot of people after November were like, okay, we voted for the big one. We don't have to worry about anything else wrong. We live in Wisconsin. And guess what? Like the Supreme Court remains one of the most important seats in the entire country. And I think that like people are paying attention because of this potential for an ideological shift on the courts. And I think that the money and the spending that is happening right now, I think they are like the powers that be that are really trying to get involved in this race and try and, you know, find them a candidate that can go in. Like they are spending this money because they believe there's a good case to be made and that they can educate folks and they can do it in this next 2 weeks. So my feeling is that between the partisans that are out here trying to get folks out to vote, and then the nonpartisan orgs that are trying to educate people about the significance of the Supreme Court and why it's important not to, you know, take a time out and sit this one out. Like I think that between now and April 1st, that we are going to see some very interesting voter turnout that takes place. Whether it's record breaking, I can't say that, but I can tell you that like I think we will be surprised when the final votes are and the final tally comes out that it will be a much closer race and then there will be a lot of people that might not have been voting or weren't planning on voting in this that will vote. And so we are working, we're doing a variety of things. The GOTV Day of Action is but one example of what we are doing to educate people. We have plans to roll out some digital ads and text messages around the spending and trying to tell people like, you know, money doesn't vote, but you do. And you have an opportunity to remind the mega wealthy that like you are still locked into this, knowing that they are spending millions upon millions of dollars. So we're going to be continuing public facing things as well as trying to connect with people in a very short amount of time to educate them about how important this race is and how you ought to be voting on this because this court is going to be deliberating on cases that will impact your life and you deserve to decide, you know, and have your voice heard about who is going to sit in that seat for the next 10 years.
Great. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today for part one of our Big Money media briefing. I'll be following up with everyone with information on the future briefings as well as the slide deck and a recording. And in the meantime, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions or if there's anything WDC can do, especially over these next chaotic 2 weeks. So thank you all so much and happy St. Patrick's Day.